Hello, everyone. Welcome to our April webinar. Thank you for joining. We'll wait about 30 seconds. It looks like some more people are joining right now. We'll get started here. All right, we'll get the show on the road. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us at your lunchtime. We appreciate your time, and hopefully you can get something out of this webinar. Also, as always, we are going to be recording this webinar. So if you have to jump off halfway through, we will be sending this out to you after the fact. So my name is Andrew McGill, and we're joined here by Jeff Rolk. I'll have Jeff introduce himself momentarily. I did just want to say before we get started, this webinar is just intended for general information purposes. We'll share a lot of information here today. If you do want to talk about any of these items offline, more than happy to do so. But again, today is just for general information purposes. So again, I'm Andrew McGill. I'm a wealth advisor here at 12 Points. For those of you who I have not met, I am here. I work with individuals and families to help them navigate their financials, whether it be from buying a home or a second home or trying to retire, whatever it may be. We're here to help you to really figure out what are the things you might not be thinking about. I think in today's age with AI and all that information out there on the web, it's very easy to find some answers, but where we bring the most benefit is the things that you might not be thinking about or the experiences others have had, like Jeff here, who's had a ton of experience helping people through the home buying process. So with that, I will turn this over to Jeff just to introduce himself.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm grateful to be here. My name's Jeff Rolk, and I work at Gold Coast Mortgage Services. We're a small independent broker located in the North Shore of Massachusetts. And as a company, we service Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire for our territory. Being independent, it's similar to 12 Points RIA status, where we don't work for any one lending institution. We broker out to lending institutions, and we're able to choose that based on the needs of our individual clients. So, like everything, mortgages are not one size fits all. There are different products. There are different companies that service certain, aspects of the market better, and we help guide our clients to the right fit for them for their, whether it's price range, whether it's their income profile, however it works. We are independent of anybody else's, product menu, and that allows us to say we work for the client, and we're honored to do that.
Yeah, and I will just give Jeff a shout out. He is someone who looks at all options and makes sure that he's working in the client's best interest. I cannot speak more highly of Jeff, and we're excited to have him here. So with that, today we'll keep it conversational. We'll go through some different topics. I'll be monitoring the chat here. So if you have any questions, feel free to just throw those in there. We'll make sure they get answered. So we'll get going. All right. So how much of a house, Jeff? Could you talk about in your experience how much people should be putting down, or the how much of their overall cash flow should be going towards the home?
Sure. And I like to frame it first with the thing that really is going to matter to the end user, to the buyer, is the payment. A lot of our industry is focused on here's what the rate is, and if you do this down payment, you qualify. And qualifying is great, but you need to live here and you need to have a life while you live there. And that is sort of the first thing you should be concerned with when you're looking at any type of mortgage or really any type of loan. What's the payment? And that payment is calculated. It's called your debt to income ratio, and everything in mortgages is monthly. So for round numbers sake, if you made $120,000 a year gross, like pre-tax, you would make $10,000 a month. And according to conventional mortgage rules, you can use up to 50% of your pre-tax income for a mortgage payment. So you can have a $5,000 payment. That payment needs to include the principal and interest, the taxes, the homeowner's insurance, and then if there's any mortgage insurance, it needs to include that as well. And if it's a condo, the HOA policy needs to be included in that also. So your all-in payment needs to be total less than 50% of your income. But the debt to income ratio includes all of your debt. So if you have a credit card bill that's 500 a month, now your mortgage payment can only be 4,500. Student loans, credit cards, car payments, anything that is attached to your social security number and recurs monthly that's on your credit, that counts in this ratio. And on this slide, it mentions the rule of 28 and 32. And that's a pretty common rule of thumb is you don't want to max out how much you can afford. You don't want to spend 50% of your income before taxes on home ownership because you're not leaving a lot left to go out to dinner and put gas in your car and do all the things that like people need to do with their lives. So kind of a good starting or aiming point is if the home itself, those principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and fees are 28% of your monthly income, and then you manage all your other debt, like an office like 12 Points would encourage you to do, your total debt to income of 32 is, so if you have a $50 credit card payment and you have a car payment that's normal, but you don't have a lot of other debt, if you're at a total of 32% of your monthly income, that's going to allow room to pay taxes, put savings away, work towards your retirement, fund vacations, have a life. And so that's sort of the preparation that you need is what is my new payment going to be? And what is that on top of all my other payments, right? How's this going to affect my daily life?
And Jeff, so what are some of the ways that you can impact that number um, when it comes to trying to get to that 28 or that 32%?
Yeah. So, the down payment, right? Like if the house is $1 million and you put down 20% or 50%, your debt to income ratio will be impacted by that. Paying off higher interest debt. So we've had clients that, you have a car payment, but that's a 5-year loan. There's only 60 payments. Your mortgage is 360. So a $25,000 car loan versus $25,000 mortgage payment, if you take your loan from 550 to 575, the payment change is significantly smaller because the loan term is so much longer. So if you're trying to control like your debt to income ratio, and let's say you're selling one house to buy the next one, that's an opportunity to use some of the equity in the house you're selling to get rid of higher interest debt and shorter term debt. And now your ratio is going to be lower even though you're paying off the same amount of debt.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And we'll keep moving here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So speaking of credit, speaking of taking loans, Jeff, could you speak to credit overall and how it impacts the home buying process?
Sure, sure. That's a natural next step. There's a mortgage itself is kind of like a 4 ingredient recipe, and your credit score is one of the ingredients. So it's your risk as a borrower, and the lender uses that based on your past history of borrowing. So if you have lates on your credit cards or student loans, that's going to impact your FICO scores, which in turn adjusts the pricing of your mortgage. So the way a mortgage is priced, and this goes back to the slide before, is there's a grid of FICO scores, and those go in 20-point increments from 620 up to 780. Everything above 780 is all treated the same. So an 820 and a 781 are identical. But below that, you begin to adjust the risk, and that results in higher costs. So again, you can control your debt to income ratio by having a better credit score. And if you have enough time, that is in your control. If you get an accepted offer and that's the first time you look at your credit, you're sort of stuck with what you have. There isn't much time to react. So you want to monitor your credit. A lot of people's credit cards have a score that just sort of shows you, and that isn't accurate for like a mortgage. But what it is accurate is if it's staying the same, that's great. If it's trending upwards, that's good news. And if it's trending down, you need to figure out why. Things like utilization are really big. So if you have a $5,000 limit on your credit card and you have $4,900 on it, that's going to impact your score. You're overutilizing it. So there's two solutions. You can pay the card down. When you're going to get a mortgage, everything being less than 30% utilized is ideal. The other solution is you can request a higher credit limit. If they move your credit limit from 5,000 to 10, now it's 50% utilized instead of 95. And that's a free solution. They can say no. But it is possible to, now you're only paying off about 2,000 of it instead of all five to have the same result.
Awesome. Awesome. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and overall on a 30-year mortgage, your FICO score alone, if you paid all 360 payments, can be a six-figure adjustment, because your monthly payment will compound over all of those payments. So, getting a look at it early is a very prudent strategy.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And yeah, and how do people do that? You recommend they come go talk to a mortgage broker before they even start looking at houses, or what do you recommend
Yeah,
there?
yeah. Part of the pre-approval should be pulling credit once a year. If you Google like free credit report, it's a .gov website and you can just get one. There's no cost, there's no impact to your credit to do it. It's a free report that is, given to you annually. So just make sure you go to the .gov website and then that'll bring you to like Experian or one of the credit bureaus. But you can see if there's something late on there that you didn't know about. Some people get a collection from like a doctor's office or a cell phone company that they're unaware of. And if there's no time limit, it's very easy to take care of. But again, if you're buying a house and now all of a sudden there's really no time to respond to it. So just keep an eye on it.
Awesome, awesome. And then one question I've got in the past was, in this day and age, with people being concerned of like credit cards and credit card fraud, people locking down their credit. Could you talk about when is the right time for someone to, if they do have their credit locked, when should they unlock in the home buying process? What do you recommend there?
Sure, it'll happen twice at least. When you do the pre-approval or the pre-qualification process, you'll have to unlock your credit for me to get scores. So for me to produce a letter saying, Andrew McGill is capable of purchasing this house, I need the four ingredients to that recipe, which is the value of the house, the price you're going to offer. I need your loan amount, which is the price you're going to offer minus your down payment. I need your FICO scores, which is your risk as a borrower, and then I need to see your income, which is your ability to pay this loan back. And with those four things, now we can give you a letter saying like, hey, this person's, capable of purchasing this home. And so you'll need to unlock your credit to get that. And then when you do engage in a mortgage, you get your offer accepted and go through the actual process of buying a house. You'll need your credit unlocked for that entire time. The lender will institute fairly aggressive credit monitoring on your behalf, and that's fraud prevention. So you'll have no concerns that your credit is unlocked for, a 30 or 60-day window, because it's being thoroughly monitored, but they need it unlocked to keep fraud prevention in place for you.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. So why don't we'll move to annual costs. Can you talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned it a little bit before, but what costs people should be expecting when they go and do home ownership and things that they should be budgeting for?
Sure, sure. Laid out here is the big ones. So your payment is going to include the principal and interest. That's your loan amount being paid back. It's going to include your taxes, which are your responsibility as a homeowner for living in whichever town or city you live in. Insurance, you have to have homeowners insurance in place for the whole time of your mortgage. So that's got to be part of your payment. And then your utility bills, that's your heat, electricity, water, all that'll need to be paid monthly. Taxes can vary somewhat wildly from town to town. So that's a good exercise is if you're just getting started, pick a price range that feels comfortable for a house or go through the pre-approval process and establish a price range. And then go to each town and look at recent sales in that price range and see what the taxes on the home are. It'll be in an annual figure on like a Zillow or Realtor.com and just divide that by 12. That's your monthly tax payment. So in addition to your mortgage payment, one house that's, say $750,000 in one town might have $6,000 in taxes, and the next town over it might be 13,000. So you have a substantial payment change difference for houses that are functionally the same. So it's a good thing to be aware of going into it. Where you are in your life can really drive that. High taxes can often mean pretty good school systems. So if you're a retiree, that's not necessarily a benefit to you. So you might be paying higher taxes for somebody else where the next town over might be a little bit more favorable in your price range. So just be aware of it and, ask the questions.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Well, we'll transition to the mortgage process and decision points. You think you could talk through these four areas for us?
Yeah, sure. Long term, the 7 years being important is 7 to 10 years is the average amount of time that a mortgage lasts. So people buy a home, maybe they move within 7 years, maybe they refinance, maybe they do a cash out and replace their loan with another loan or lower their rate. But 7 years is about how long a mortgage lasts. And what we want to do is be cautious of overspending at the beginning of 7 years, not paying points and stuff, but we'll get to that down at the bottom. Your down payment is a function of how much mortgage you're going to end up with. So that purchase price minus your down payment. To get into a conventional loan, which this year is $836,000 and change, that and below loan amount is a conventional loan. So you can do as little as 5% down, potentially even 3% if you're a first-time home buyer, and take a loan of $836,000. But the more you put down, the less risk there is to the lender. So if you have a 20% down payment, you no longer need mortgage insurance. If you do 5% down and you have great credit, the mortgage insurance is less expensive because your spending history and your payment history is showing that you're less of a risk because you have these higher FICO scores. So that kind of goes back to the other slide, but it's constantly showing up. A lot of things are based on your credit and income. Fixed versus variable. In the 11 years plus I've been at Gold Coast, I've never written a variable rate mortgage. I don't like the position that it puts people in. And right now, we're kind of at a prime example at the beginning of the pandemic when rates went to the lowest they've been in history. Um, People took a 5 or a 7 year adjustable rate. And, let's suppose you could have had 3% for 30 years and people took 2.75 for 5. And now the rate's going to 7 or 6.5, and there's nothing they can do about it. And it's a position I'll never have a client call me and be upset that they're in. So in my mind, fixed rate should be the only type of product. The other problem with adjustable rates is typically they charge points. So if I price them out in my system, if I do a no points 30-year fixed and a no points 7 year adjustable, the rates are the same. So a lot of lenders show a lower rate by charging a point or even 2 points, which is 1% of your loan amount. So 2 points on a $500,000 mortgage is $10,000 to lower your rate. And I don't functionally agree with that as a good place to put people in. So we're a fixed rate office and proudly. And I kind of touched on that last one, paying the points. If you can pay like a fractional point to get an eighth lower, so if it's $500 to go from 6.375 to 6.25, and the payment change is $30 a month, you can calculate how many months it takes you to turn positive, and you'll be paying less. But if you're paying 10 or $15,000 in points, you're talking years before that lower rate begins to save you any money because you're paying yourself back the points that you spent. So if you do refinance in that first 7 years, you might have only had 2 years of savings. And I don't think that's worth the risk in most cases, but I can help people calculate out how long out is the break even point and then, make a decision from there.
And just to kind of pull back a little bit from the points, could you talk about like when people hear points, can you kind of talk about what actually that is?
Sure. So 1 point is 1% of your loan amount. So again, for round numbers on a $500,000 loan, a point is $5,000. You can either be paid points or you can pay them. So when someone says a no points rate, that's the lowest interest rate you can get without paying any points. So I ran an example in preparation for this call with
Awesome.
All other things being equal. I think it was 25% down on $1 million, so $750,000 loan. And this would proportionately change. 25% down on $300,000 would result in these same numbers. They just, the actual payment amounts are different. So a no points rate with great credit, all other things being equal, was 6.375. And that had a credit to it of 0.325, which is $2,500, a little bit less than that. So if you took that rate, you would get $2,400 and change towards your closing costs or your fees for closing on that mortgage. And the other side is paying points. So I used that 2 points example, and the closest I could get was 5.625%, cost 1.9 points, which is on $750,000, $14,445. So you would be giving up the almost $2,500 credit and paying $14,400, which is a total cost to you of $16,883. And now the change in the rate from 6.375 to 5.625 is a difference of $362 every month. So the break even point on that is 46 months out. So just under 4 years before you save any money. So if you change jobs in 2 years and you leave that house, if you refinance because rates have gone down even further, you're walking away from thousands of dollars that you spent up front. And lenders like to offer this, I believe, because that takes the risk off of them and puts it on to you, the end user of the mortgage. So if you do a 0 points rate, for instance, that first one, the 6.375, and you get paid $2,500, you haven't spent that money on your closing costs. So if in 8 or 10 months rates go down, you just refinance the loan. Your costs are lower. And the only thing to figure out is, again, if there's $3,000 in cost to get you to that rate we just mentioned, the 5.625, that's a 10-month break even point because you're saving 360 a month starting in month one. So if you pay your closing costs on the refinance, 10 months from then, you're whole again. And now you're saving, not 4 years.
I that was really helpful. So for anyone out there that maybe they're at their office and a colleague of theirs, they say to them, "Yeah, I'm trying to buy a house, but rates are so high right now," and your colleague says, "Yeah, you can get lower rates. You can just pay up front. You pay more up front." There's an and to that. That number needs to be looked at and understand what can you end up saving money in the long term? Are you going to be refinancing potentially? So all of these things should be thought through. That your colleague is correct, but there is an and there, and that's what Jeff is talking about is what is the pros and cons of doing that and paying some of that money up front. So thank you, Jeff, and we'll move over to talking about some tools and resources that people can use to kind of help them in this process.
Sure. So the first one is just an online calculator. And similar to, Googling medical symptoms, you want to use that with good information. So in most cases, anything where you can control the numbers is an interactive advertisement. So go to step two here, lenders and mortgage brokers. If you go through a pre-approval process, and you know about what rate you're going to be offered, now you can go back to the mortgage calculator and put an accurate rate in. And you want to use that when you're just looking online at houses. So let's say rates, like I said, the no points rate was 6.375. So put in 6.5. And then go find the taxes on the house you're looking at and divide that by 12 and get a rough quote on what homeowners insurance would be and put that in. And then mortgagecalculator.org is going to be relatively accurate. But if it lets you pick what your rate is, you're just walking around in the dark. So it's not gonna help you as much. Property insurance is a necessary part, and those prices change pretty wildly depending on the location of the property and some of the amenities of the property. So it should be free to get a quote from somebody. If you just say, "I'm looking at this house, could you give me a quote?" Whoever does your auto insurance, find somebody local, find somebody reputable, look at reviews, and just get good data to put into the calculator. So you can say I'll get $99 a month homeowners insurance, but that doesn't help you if it's $250 a month. That should be pretty high. But if it's 150 a month and Geico has an ad that says 50, but it doesn't mean you, it's just not going to help you. So getting real numbers from somebody that's, an authority on the topic will make your own calculations much more accurate, and then you can go and do it.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm just going to check to see if we have any questions. None as of now. We'll keep moving here, and
Being easy on me.
we'll talk about working with a realtor.
Yeah. So your realtor is the boots on the ground person. My business is the numbers. So you find a house and you say, this house is $1 million and this house is $2 million. Can I afford them? My job is to say yes or no and what the payment will be. The realtor's job is, should you offer $2 million, or are you going to end up having to offer 2.2, or can you offer 1.8? They are your local knowledge on that area's real estate and the climate of it. So is it a seller's market? Is it a buyer's market? How is this house priced? So a lot of houses, the price will seem too good to be true, and potentially the sellers are using a strategy that is, we want a lot of people to come and see it and create a bidding war. Some people, they'll price the house very fairly and very accurately, and your realtor should be able to say, offering the asking price is not unreasonable. And some of them might say, this house is overpriced and it's been on for a little while. Let's offer them a little bit less. I would have no input on that, and I shouldn't. So your realtor is that person. And what you need from them is that they have relevant local knowledge in where you're trying to buy. So, the realtor that sells your house on the South Shore probably shouldn't be your realtor in Southern New Hampshire if that's where you're moving to, because they don't have the same finger on the pulse of the local market that they do at home. So they would price your house very accurately, but they might not be able to be as useful in your purchase. And they don't have relationships with the other realtors. So somebody who's known to be professional and known to bring good clients, their offer does carry a little bit more weight than somebody you've never met before, because nobody in real estate gets paid until the home is bought. So that's kind of everybody's main concern. On here it mentions the commissions. That's a bit of a gray area right now. There was the NAR lawsuit, and that is changing how realtors get paid. So you need to individually interview them and ask what the strategy is. Some of them still seek that the buyer pays their commission. Some of them make it part of the purchase and the seller pays them. And that just needs to be disclosed and agreed upon up front. So just be aware that it's coming. And if you're paying your realtor, you need to factor that into the cost you're going to have.
Perfect, perfect. And so we have two questions here. I want to come back to them, but the one thing I did want to add here is for anyone out there that is thinking about buying, or just want to, maybe you feel overwhelmed. You're like, I'm never going to buy a home. I would 100% recommend just going to open houses and looking at homes, walking inside, just looking around, seeing things, envisioning yourself in a space, really trying to figure out what you like, what you don't like. It's amazing when you're just walking in a house and you start noticing things that you would have never noticed even before in the space that you live in. And then while you do that, and again, Jeff has great contacts. There's some great brokers out there. I've just found in my experience that many brokers will say that they work in this area. You say the area, they work there. If you go out and do your due diligence and just go by yourself, look at the places, and you start seeing that same broker at every single one of those open houses, they work in that area and they're an expert. Not to say that there's other people that aren't there that aren't, but if you want to start having conversations and want to meet people, because more than ever, and Jeff can tell us otherwise, this is really a seller's market. And when I say seller's market, it's a very competitive market. And working with a broker that has connections in that area, that might be able to know someone that hasn't put their place on the market yet. They say they don't want to put it out there for whatever reason. They can get you in, look at the house, maybe buy the house before it goes on the market. It may be wishful thinking, but these are the sort of things that this is why more than ever you want to have an expert in your corner. Just like Jeff, also a broker in your corner as well. So
Well put.
we have a couple questions here. Number one, what actually changes the rate economic wise, and how is this decided?
Yeah. So interest rates are tied to the mainly to the bond market. So the 30-year fixed rate is most closely tied to the 10-year treasury. So the TNX stock symbol. And that's mainly because that's the closest bond that lasts 10 years. And an average mortgage lasts about 7 to 10 years. So if that is trending up, rates are going up. And if that's trending down, rates are trending down. It's not an identical number. So right now the 10-year bond is in the very low fours, and rates are in the sixes. So it's that bond price plus a premium on it. And it's relatively accurate. So just before the country went to war a few weeks ago, the 10-year bond had just gotten to like 3.99 and then jumped right back into the fours because of geopolitical reasons. But that's going to be your driver. It's not the Fed rate. It's not what you hear on the news. If the Fed is lowering rates, that's an overnight banking rate. It doesn't affect your credit card interest rate. It doesn't affect your mortgage interest rate. It's much more tied to market conditions.
Yeah, and something I'll add is bonds and like the 10-year rate. It's a pretty complex concept of how it prices and things like that. But one of the ways to think about it is that if if people think that inflation is going to increase, and they are going to think that they're not able they're the amount that their bond is increasing is not going to keep up with inflation, the rates are most likely going to go up. So when you see things like oil prices and things like going up, most likely the mortgage rates are going to go up. It's happened the opposite way before, but that's typically a way to look at it. If you start seeing that inflation's coming down, the 10-year typically starts coming down. There's a few other dynamics there, but just by and large, that is typically how it works. The other question is, what does refinance actually mean? Is there specific eligibility?
Sure. So eligibility is qualifying in that case, but a refinance is replacing a current mortgage with another one. So if you have a house that you bought for $1 million and you put down 20% and you have an $800,000 loan, and let's say you bought that 2.5 years ago and rates were in the sevens and now they're in the low sixes, you could refinance that loan by applying for a new $800,000 mortgage at today's rates. And the eligibility is your ability to pay that loan back. So you would need to qualify for it, and that's your income again and your ability to secure that loan. And then the other piece of eligibility is what we talked about in the paying points and the payment is how much are you going to save and how much is it going to cost you? So if you can get down 0.5% on a pretty good sized loan and it's $500 a month with $3,000 in costs, you go positive in 6 months. That's really worth doing. If it's more than 12 months, we usually say, okay, let's set a watermark for what rate we need to get you below that, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then we have one other question, kind of a hypothetical for someone's situation. They bought their house 16 years ago. The
Mhm.
property has increased over the years, and they are looking to sell their house in 4 years after the kids are out of high school and move closer to the coast. Would it make sense to sell a year or two before I move and rent to protect against a dip in the market? I can start here. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the market looks like. I will tell you right now, this is a, this is a seller's market for sure. This would be, and any broker would tell you that it's always a good time to buy. It's always a good time to sell. But I will just tell you from not even being related in that interaction, now people are looking to own homes more than ever. They really value where they live. I think that's a after COVID thing. I think everyone's always loved their home, but more than ever right now, people love their home. And I think that if that's your plan, that would be something. Again, I would want to know all the different details, but now is a great time to be selling based on this current market.
Yeah.
Jeff, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, there's no wrong answer on that one. If renting for a year or two is comfortable for you, we've seen people that have a vacation home and they've gone and stayed at it. What it does is removes your need to sell that property. So when I give you a pre-qualification letter and you need to sell your house to buy the next one, that's called a contingency. And if someone, offers the same price and they don't have a contingency, they're a little bit more appealing. So if that's comfortable for you, it's a great idea and it's a great strategy. And if that's not comfortable, then you just need to work it another way. Some people may have the ability to take a loan against their assets, other assets, or they might be able to pay cash for their down payment, then sell their house after the fact. That's a bit of a individual question. So like that's something that offline I could help somebody work out and just run projections of if you sell, here's what happens. If you don't sell, here's what happens. And this is how it would look. But the short answer is both are a really good idea if they work for you. They're options. So, and options are good.
And I'm pretty certain one of the 46 people, of the 46 participants in this, might be willing to make you an offer there. So I appreciate the hypothetical, and always happy to answer. We're happy to answer these questions. We have one other question, then we'll move into talking about cash at closing. Any advice or best practices for first-time homeowners about to buy a parent's home? Are there any watchouts in this situation?
No, that's an off-market purchase is kind of the only good deal left today. So if you can buy out your parents' home, you want to agree on a price and create a purchase and sale. So there's less cooks in the kitchen. You'll have an attorney draft that P&S, and then the few options are how the parents are selling it to you, so they can gift equity for your down payment potentially, or you can bring your own down payment and finance the rest. So occasionally that's used as a wealth transfer strategy and can move the, one house to the next generation. But that's a really wonderful thing to see happen for people.
Yeah, there's some opportunity when it comes to estate planning and gifting money for the down payment to remove that money from someone's estate so they don't pay estate taxes. It might not be something they're thinking about now,
Yeah.
but something that should be thought about. And also a lot of these things with in some situations, depending on the age of parents, sometimes inheriting a home and getting a step up in basis on the home is sometimes valuable. I have no idea your current situation, but this is why kind of looking at each situation as a one off is important. But I think Jeff brings up a great point. So we will keep moving. Thank you everyone for the questions, and I'll keep monitoring that. So next slide we have is cash at closing. Do you mind speaking a little bit to this, Jeff, and what people can expect?
Sure. There's a couple of sort of sections of money that end up being due at closing. And kind of incorrectly, they get lumped together as all closing costs, but closing costs has a definition. So the first big section of money is your down payment and your deposits. So if you're buying a house for 500,000 and you're putting 20% down, there needs to be $50,000 involved by the closing day. Typically, when you write an offer, you'll give $1,000, good faith deposit check with your offer. So that leaves 49,000 left. And then when you sign the purchase and sale, 5% is typically the deposit to go with the purchase and sale. If you're doing a loan product that has 3% down, we would furnish that is available. And usually the seller's attorney will totally accept that a 3% deposit. That makes sense. But if you're doing 25% down, you have another 20% due at the closing. That's not a closing cost, that's a down payment. Then you have your actual closing costs, which are non-refundable things you need to do to secure a property, not a mortgage, just the property itself. So you need to do a title search, you need to pay an attorney to do your closing, you need to record a deed. All these things are activities that have to be done to purchase a property. And then the last section of costs is your prepaids, and that's unique to the mortgage. So if you're getting a mortgage, you'll owe a partial month of interest at the closing. So if you buy the house today on the 21st, we owe from now until the end of this month to make you even on the mortgage because it starts the day that you take ownership of the house. And then if you have an escrow account, which is an account that pays your taxes and insurance, you need to fund that. And that's also due at the closing, but those are not closing costs. So those are your responsibility as a homeowner, and you just need to have that money at closing. So it's three different things that are due at closing. Only one section is closing costs, but they are all due on that closing day. And, before you even make an offer, you should be able to have a relatively accurate expectation of what those are.
Great. All right, so we're at 12:41. Wanted to shift gears. We had a question, and I think it's a good time to go to this. Someone was asking about selling a home and things to be thinking about when they're selling their home.
Yeah.
Um, Jeff, do you think you could speak to on this go over here the optimal times, and not necessarily optimal times, but could you talk about things to be thinking about as not only when you're buying, but also things about selling?
Yeah. The big thing is any deferred maintenance. If the house has a known issue, you need to calculate that out and disclose it. So you either need to price that the buyer will accept the issue, like a foundation crack, a roof that's fairly aged. You just need to be aware of that stuff. And if you don't want to do it and you're able to fund the repair, now the house is slightly more valuable to the next buyer because their home inspection will be more complete, right? They'll be happier with the result of the home inspection. So if deferred maintenance is the big thing to look into if you're selling, and then again, identifying your realtor for the sale, if you're going to use one, that person would walk through the house and make suggestions on any updates that might be valuable to the house. A lot of updates don't necessarily result in a dollar increase in your sale, so you can feel free to skip them. And then there are certain updates that people might find valuable and might get you more offers. And again, that would be the realtor's perspective of the market that your home is in. Um, Seasonality is kind of gone lately. Anytime you put a house on the market, there's more buyers than there are sellers right now. At least in New England. Massachusetts, where we live, it's with certainty. Other parts of the country are a little bit different, but just again, seek very good knowledgeable people that can help you with market conditions, and they'll sort of guide you to the really specific steps to take. But just be aware that sure, if you're thinking of selling in 2 years, maybe we should cross some things off the list over those next 2 years.
Perfect. Yeah, and I just want to double down on that piece in terms of like things you can do. And I think it's important early on to have a broker or someone that you know who knows the area who can come in and say what would bring value. I mean, couple examples in some towns right now, people aren't even going inside the homes; they're just looking outside of the foundation whether they can knock it down. Um,
Yes.
and That's super important. And for the longest time, people are like bathrooms and kitchens. And sometimes if someone makes their house so modern or just does some certain things, someone walks in and they don't, it's maybe it was trendy then, but it's not something they're looking at now. So
Right. Can you imagine redoing a master bathroom or adding one to your basement to have the house knocked over?
yeah,
So you
exactly.
just spent $30,000 for something that brought zero value to the buyer. So again, you need somebody who has authority on that topic, right? Like what's the next step for this property? Who's the buyer for it? And they can guide you on dollars well spent versus wasted.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just as easy as a coat of paint, and that makes all the
Yes.
difference. Um, And then we had one other question here, and thank you for the person who asked about the selling homes. If you have any other questions, let us know. Someone asked about solar panels. Is there any issue selling a home if you still own the solar panels? Is it smart to take out a loan to pay for the solar panels?
It depends on the actual loan itself. So in the past, they've been really difficult because there's a lien against the property that is tied to the owner. And so changing ownership becomes difficult. Um, Today, it's geared a little bit differently. So the you as the owner have the loan. And so if you're selling the property, ideally, you're harvesting some equity out of the house and you'll use that to wipe the loan out. Some people ask that that loan transfer to the next owner, but that's negotiable for the next owner. They definitely didn't ask you to get that loan. And so you can pay it off at the closing. You can keep making the payments on it if for some reason that works for you, but it does not hinder the sale of the property as much as they used to.
Yeah, I would certainly think about that for not only buying but also selling. We had a client who actually backed out of a deal because of there were some issues on the actual roof itself underneath the solar panels. So,
Ah,
and they had a lease on the solar panels. So it's important. Not only would you have to have the solar panels removed, then you have to fix the roof, and then you have to do all those things. So those are things you want to make sure that you are
right. So if
thinking
the
about. It
house
may be
has
nice.
solar panels, it's worth asking, right? What's the
Yeah.
status of them? Is there a loan on them? And you can look in the registry of deeds to see if there's a lien on the house involving, the solar company. So if there's just a mortgage, if there's two mortgages or there's an energy loan, you can see it. And then just, know to ask. So that's back to the team around you should be spotting for those things and helping you with them.
And then that is all I have here in terms of that. We're just going to look at the questions here. Nothing. We'll hang out and we'll just see if there's any questions. We're at 12:47. Appreciate
Perfect.
everyone joining. Jeff and I will stay here for a bit to see if there's any other questions in here. But thank you all again. It was a pleasure to have you join us all. Thanks for spending your lunchtime with us, and we'll see you next month for our next webinar. And be cool if we could just live bid the home.
What was that?
It'd be cool to just live bid the home of the participant that asked the
Oh
question.
yeah, have an auction. We could do
Yeah,
it.
we have an auction next week. We'll have an auction
Where is it?
right here in Zoom. The question, well, okay, will this be sent as a recording? Yes, this will be sent. If you had registered for this, as you did, you are here. You will get the recording. Thank you very much for joining. And those who are still on, we have about looks like 19 people on. One of the big things here that we didn't mention was just some cash flow and making sure you budget. If you're interested in any sort of like cash flow worksheet or anything along those lines, please let us know. But something as simple as a Google search to like just kind of get your expenses organized, that works as well. But happy to share what we have on our end. All right. Well, that does it for questions here. All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, and we'll
No,
sign
thank
off
you,
here.
Andrew.
Have a great rest of your day.
All right, grateful for your time. Take care.
Bye, everyone.